Picture this. You're at your own father's retirement party, celebrating his 30 years of service as a fire chief, when your own brother stands up in front of everyone and decides to humiliate you. That's exactly what happened to me, Madison Clark, and what my brother Trevor said that night would come back to haunt him in the most spectacular way possible. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole mess started 3 months earlier when I landed my dream job at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. After 4 years of studying cybersecurity and information systems at the University of Denver, I finally had my foot in the door as a junior cybersecurity analyst for the Department of Defense. The pay was decent, the benefits were excellent, and most importantly, I was doing work that actually mattered, protecting our nation's digital infrastructure from foreign threats. But try explaining that to my family. My brother Trevor had always been the golden child. 2 years older than me, he'd followed in our dad's footsteps and became a firefighter right out of high school. While I was buried in textbooks learning about network protocols and encryption algorithms, Trevor was out there saving lives, running into burning buildings, and getting his picture in the local newspaper every few months for some heroic act. Don't get me wrong, I was proud of him. Firefighting is dangerous, important work, and Trevor was genuinely good at it. He'd already been promoted to lieutenant at just 26, and everyone said he was destined to follow Dad's path to fire chief someday. The problem wasn't Trevor's success. The problem was how he treated my career choice. It started with little comments during family dinners. "How's the computer stuff going, Madison?" he'd ask with this condescending smirk. Or he'd make jokes about how I was playing video games for the government. When relatives asked what I did for work, Trevor would jump in before I could answer. "Oh, Madison sits behind a desk all day staring at computer screens. Real exciting stuff." The worst part was how my parents reacted. Mom would give me these sympathetic looks, like I was somehow missing out on real work, while Dad would just nod and change the subject. They loved me, but I could tell they didn't really understand what I did or why it mattered. Things escalated during Thanksgiving dinner at my Aunt Patricia's house. The whole extended family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, about 20 people total. Everyone was sharing what they were thankful for, and when it got to Trevor, he stood up with his beer and launched into this whole speech about how grateful he was to have meaningful work that makes a real difference in people's lives. Then he looked directly at me and added, "Not everyone can say they've actually saved lives or protected their community in a tangible way. Some people just push papers and click buttons all day. But hey, someone's got to do the boring jobs too, right?" The table went quiet. My face burned with embarrassment as everyone's eyes shifted between Trevor and me. My grandmother, bless her heart, tried to change the subject by asking about dessert, but the damage was done. I excused myself and went for a walk around the block, fighting back tears. Here I was, working on systems that protected military communications, defense contractors, and critical infrastructure from cyber attacks launched by hostile foreign governments, and my own brother thought I was just pushing papers? The truth was, my job was incredibly demanding and stressful. I spent my days monitoring network traffic for suspicious activity, analyzing malware samples, and coordinating responses to potential security breaches. Just the week before Thanksgiving, our team had identified and stopped a sophisticated attempt by foreign hackers to infiltrate the base's communication systems. If they'd succeeded, classified information about military operations could have been compromised. But I couldn't talk about any of that. Security clearances come with strict rules about what you can and can't discuss, even with family. So while Trevor got to come home with exciting stories about rescuing cats from trees or pulling people from burning cars, I had to stay silent about the digital battles I was fighting every single day. The situation reached its breaking point in February, during Dad's retirement party. The whole fire department had rented out the back room at Murphy's Steakhouse, and it seemed like half the town had shown up to honor Dad's 30 years of service. There were speeches, presentations, and a slideshow of Dad's career highlights. I was actually having a good time. I'd driven down from Colorado Springs for the weekend, and it felt nice to be back home in Pueblo, surrounded by people who'd watched me grow up. Several of Dad's colleagues asked about my work, and I gave them my usual vague answers about computer security for the government. Then came time for family speeches. Mom went first, talking about Dad's dedication and sacrifice. My younger sister Emma spoke about what it meant to grow up as a firefighter's daughter. Then Trevor stood up. He started off fine, talking about Dad's mentorship and how proud he was to follow in his footsteps. But then his tone shifted, and I could see where this was heading. Dad taught us that real work means getting your hands dirty, Trevor said, his voice carrying across the room. He taught us that a man's job should matter and should make a difference in the real world. Some of us learned that lesson. His eyes found mine across the room. And some of us decided to take the easy road instead. A few people chuckled uncomfortably. Dad looked confused, glancing between Trevor and me. While some people are content to hide behind computer screens, playing make-believe that clicking buttons is somehow important work, real men are out here saving actual lives, Trevor continued, his voice getting louder. Madison might have a fancy college degree and a cushy government desk job, but at the end of the day, she's just a glorified secretary, typing emails all day. The room had gone completely silent. I felt every eye in the place boring me. My hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Part of me wanted to storm out, but another part wanted to stand up and tell everyone exactly what kind of typing I did all day. How I'd helped prevent cyber attacks that could have crippled military communications. How our team's work had identified foreign intelligence operations targeting American defense contractors. But I couldn't say any of that. So I just sat there, frozen, as my brother continued his public humiliation.
I'm just saying, Dad, you raised us to understand that work should have meaning, should make a real impact. Some of us got the message. He raised his beer toward the other firefighters in the room, and some of us took the path of least resistance. That's when Chief Rodriguez, Dad's longtime friend and successor, stood up. I'd known Chief Rodriguez since I was a kid. He'd been over for barbecues, had taught me how to throw a curveball, had even given me my first job recommendation letter when I was applying for college. But what he said next changed everything. Chief Rodriguez cleared his throat and looked directly at Trevor. The man commanded respect wherever he went. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen 3 decades of emergencies. When he spoke, people listened. "Trevor, son, I think you might want to sit down for a minute," Chief Rodriguez said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the entire room pay attention. "Because I've got something to tell you about your sister's work that might change your perspective." Trevor's confident smirk faltered slightly, but he remained standing. "Chief Rodriguez, with all due respect, I know what Madison does. She sits behind a computer all day. It's not exactly rocket science." The chief's expression darkened. "That's where you're wrong, and that's exactly the problem. You don't know what your sister does, Trevor. None of us really did until 3 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. 3 weeks ago? What was he talking about? Chief Rodriguez continued, his gaze never leaving Trevor's face. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Colonel Patricia Hendricks at Peterson Air Force Base. She wanted to speak with me about Madison Clark, and she had some very specific questions about her character and background. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. I felt like I might throw up. A security investigation? Has something gone wrong at work? Had I somehow compromised classified information without realizing it? Turns out, your sister had been recommended for something called a Special Recognition Award from the Department of Defense. But before they could process it, they needed to conduct what they call a community character assessment. That's where I came in. Trevor finally sat down, looking confused. Dad leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested. Colonel Hendricks explained to me that Madison had been part of a team that identified and stopped what she called a sophisticated multi-vector cyber attack on Peterson Air Force Base's systems. Apparently, foreign hackers had been trying to penetrate their networks for months, using techniques so advanced that most cybersecurity teams wouldn't have even known they were being attacked. I remembered that incident. It had been one of the most intense weeks of my career. We'd detected unusual traffic patterns that seemed innocuous at first glance, but something about the timing and frequency had bothered me. I'd spent 4 straight days analyzing the data, tracking digital breadcrumbs across multiple servers, slowly piecing together what turned out to be an incredibly sophisticated infiltration attempt. But here's the part that really got my attention, Chief Rodriguez said, his voice rising slightly. Colonel Hendricks told me that Madison didn't just identify the attack, she traced it back to its source, identified the specific foreign intelligence service behind it, and then developed a counter-strategy that not only stopped the attack, but fed false information back to the attackers. Trevor's face had gone pale. Around the room, people were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before: surprise, respect, curiosity. The colonel used a phrase I'll never forget, Chief Rodriguez continued. She said Madison had demonstrated exceptional analytical capability in defense of critical national security infrastructure. Those weren't casual words, folks. That's military speak for this person's work directly protected American lives and interests. My hands were trembling. I'd known the incident was significant, but I'd had no idea it had caught the attention of people high enough up the chain to warrant a special award. But wait, there's more, Chief Rodriguez said, and I could tell he was just getting started. Turns out, this wasn't Madison's first rodeo. Over the past 18 months, she'd been involved in stopping no fewer than 7 separate cyber attacks on military and defense contractor systems. 7! And we're not talking about some teenager trying to hack a website for fun. These were coordinated attacks by foreign governments trying to steal military secrets, compromise defense communications, and identify vulnerabilities in our national security infrastructure. The silence in the room was deafening. I caught Dad's eye, and for the first time in years, I saw something new there: pride mixed with amazement. Colonel Hendricks spent 20 minutes on the phone with me describing Madison's work. She told me about classified briefings where Madison had presented analysis directly to Pentagon officials. She mentioned a case where Madison's detective work had identified a security breach that could have compromised the locations of American military personnel overseas. That case had given me nightmares for weeks. We'd discovered that foreign hackers had penetrated a contractor's database and were systematically accessing personnel files for deployed service members. If we hadn't caught it when we did, American soldiers could have been targeted for kidnapping or assassination. She also told me something that really put things in perspective for me as a first responder, Chief Rodriguez continued, his eyes now moving around the room to address everyone present. She said that in the modern world, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, power grids, communication systems, transportation networks pose just as much danger to civilian populations as any fire or natural disaster. The difference is, when Madison and her team stop these attacks, nobody sees the emergency vehicles or the dramatic rescues. They just prevent the crisis from happening in the first place. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. For years, I'd struggled with the invisible nature of my work, the way it seemed less important than jobs where you could point to concrete, visible results. But hearing it described this way, I finally understood that prevention could be just as heroic as response. Trevor, Chief Rodriguez said, turning back to my brother, your sister isn't just some desk jockey pushing papers. She's a digital first responder, standing guard against threats most of us can't even comprehend. While you're running into burning buildings to save people, she's preventing those buildings from being set on fire in the first place. Trevor looked like he'd been hit by a truck.
His face was red, and he kept opening and closing his mouth like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The colonel asked me about Madison's character, her integrity, her dedication to service, Chief Rodriguez continued. I told her what I've observed over the years, that Madison has always been thoughtful, hardworking, and committed to doing the right thing. But I also told her something else. He paused, looking directly at me now. I told her that Madison comes from a family of first responders, people who understand that service sometimes means doing the hard, thankless jobs that keep other people safe. I told her that Madison's father spent 30 years running toward danger to protect his community, and that she'd clearly inherited that same sense of duty. She just applied it in a different arena. Dad was nodding slowly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head as he processed this new understanding of what I did for a living. Colonel Hendricks thanked me for the information and told me the award ceremony would be held next month. She also mentioned that Madison had been selected for promotion to senior analyst, with a significant increase in security clearance and responsibility. This was news to me. I hadn't heard anything about a promotion, but then again, these things often moved through channels I wasn't privy to. She ended the call by saying something I'll never forget, Chief Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. She said, "Chief Rodriguez, I want you to know that your community should be proud of Madison Clark. Her work over the past year has directly contributed to preventing cyber attacks that could have resulted in loss of American lives. In my opinion, she's as much a hero as any firefighter or police officer." The room erupted in murmurs and conversations as people began to process what they'd just heard. I saw aunts and uncles looking at me with new eyes, fire department colleagues nodding with understanding, and my parents exchanging glances that said they were finally beginning to grasp what their daughter actually did for a living. But all I could focus on was Trevor, who was staring down at his hands, his earlier bravado completely deflated. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Trevor finally looked up, his face a mixture of shame and confusion. I had no idea," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the murmur of conversations starting around us. Chief Rodriguez wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something before looking back up at the room. "Actually, there's one more thing. After my conversation with Colonel Hendricks, I did some research of my own. I wanted to understand exactly what Madison's field involves." He held up his phone. According to the Department of Homeland Security, cyber attacks on American infrastructure have increased by 400% in the last 5 years. Last year alone, foreign hackers attempted over 2 million attacks on government and military systems. Most of these attacks are never reported in the news because they're stopped by people like Madison before they can cause damage. The room was hanging on every word now. Even the servers had stopped moving around, drawn into the conversation. I also learned that the average cyber attack on a military installation can cost anywhere from $500,000 to $50 million in damage if it's successful. But that's just the financial cost. The real danger is operational compromise, attacks that could reveal troop movements, compromise communication systems, or identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited in wartime. My cousin Jake, who worked as an IT technician at a local hospital, raised his hand tentatively. "Chief, are you saying these attacks could actually affect regular people too?" "Absolutely," Chief Rodriguez replied. "Madison's team doesn't just protect military secrets. They protect the civilian infrastructure that our entire way of life depends on. Power grids, water treatment facilities, air traffic control systems, banking networks, all of these are potential targets for foreign hackers." He turned back to Trevor. "Your sister's work prevents blackouts that could shut down hospitals. It stops attacks that could contaminate water supplies or crash airliners. When Madison successfully stops a cyber attack, she might be preventing disasters that would require hundreds of first responders to address." Trevor ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process everything he was hearing. "But why didn't she ever tell us any of this?" Because she can't, Chief Rodriguez said firmly. Security clearance doesn't just mean she has access to classified information. It means she's legally bound to keep quiet about most of what she does. The oath she took when she got that clearance is just as serious as the oath I took when I became fire chief, or the oath you took when you became a firefighter. Dad finally spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. Madison, honey, is this all true? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The weight of years of misunderstanding and dismissal was finally lifting, but it left me feeling emotionally raw. I wish I could tell you more, I managed to say, but Chief Rodriguez is right. Most of what I do, I can't talk about, not because I don't want to, but because it's classified. My Aunt Patricia, who had been quiet through most of Chief Rodriguez's revelation, suddenly sat up straighter. Wait a minute, Madison, remember last Christmas when you had to leave early because of a work emergency? I remembered. I'd driven 4 hours through a snowstorm to get back to Colorado Springs because our team had detected signs of a coordinated attack timed for the holiday weekend when staffing would be minimal. You said it was just a system malfunction, Aunt Patricia continued, but it was actually an attack, wasn't it? I looked around the room at all the expectant faces. I can't give you details, but yes, it was an attack. We worked for 36 hours straight to contain it. Uncle Mike, a veteran who'd served in Iraq, leaned forward. Madison, when you say foreign hackers, are we talking about the same countries we're worried about militarily? The same ones, I confirmed. The digital battlefield is just as real as any physical one, sometimes more dangerous because the attacks are invisible until it's too late. Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's exactly what Colonel Hendricks explained to me. She said that in her opinion, cybersecurity specialists like Madison are fighting on the front lines of modern warfare. The enemy just happens to be sitting in a computer lab in a foreign country instead of a tank or a fighter jet. Trevor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, I thought he was going to storm out, but instead he walked over to where I was sitting. The entire room watched as he stopped in front of me. Madison, he said, his voice shaky, I owe you an apology, a huge one. I started to stand up, but he motioned for me to stay seated. No, let me say this while I still have the courage. He took a deep breath. I've been a complete ass to you for years. I thought your job was easy, meaningless, just something you did because you didn't want to get your hands dirty like the rest of us. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. Tears were streaming down my face now. Trevor, you didn't know. But I should have, he interrupted. I should have asked. I should have tried to understand. Instead, I just assumed that because your work wasn't visible, it wasn't important. I made you feel ashamed of something you should be proud of. He looked around the room, addressing everyone present. My sister is a hero. She's been protecting all of us, protecting our country, and instead of supporting her, I've been tearing her down. That makes me the worst kind of brother. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just embarrassment about being corrected in public. This was genuine remorse from someone who had just realized the magnitude of his mistake.
Madison, Trevor continued, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of your service, I'm proud of your dedication, and I'm ashamed that it took someone else telling me about your accomplishments for me to realize what an amazing person my sister is. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. And I want everyone in this room to know something else. From now on, when people ask me what my sister does for a living, I'm going to tell them the truth. She's a guardian. She stands watch over our country's digital infrastructure, fighting battles most of us will never even know about, preventing catastrophes that could affect millions of people. The room erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some wiping away tears of their own. Dad walked over and pulled both Trevor and me into a massive bear hug. I'm proud of both of you, he said, his voice barely controlled. Trevor, it takes a real man to admit when he's wrong and make things right. And Madison, I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what you've been doing. Your mother and I raised you to serve others, and you've been doing exactly that in ways we never imagined. As the applause died down and conversations resumed around the room, Chief Rodriguez approached our little family group. "Madison," he said, "I hope you don't mind that I shared what Colonel Hendricks told me. I know you're not supposed to discuss your work, but she specifically said the award was going to be public, and she thought your family deserved to understand what you do." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. I've wanted to tell them for so long. "Well," he said with a smile, "there's one more thing. Colonel Hendricks asked me to give you her contact information. She said she'd like to invite your family to the award ceremony next month. Apparently, they're making quite a big deal of it." He handed me a business card. "She also mentioned that there might be some opportunities for you to do public speaking about cybersecurity careers. Help other young people understand that there are ways to serve your country that don't involve wearing a uniform." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, the atmosphere had completely changed. Instead of the awkward tension that had defined so many family gatherings, there was warmth, understanding, and genuine pride. Relatives who had never shown much interest in my career were asking thoughtful questions about cybersecurity, and Trevor was sticking close by, clearly eager to repair the damage his years of dismissiveness had caused. But the real change was in how I felt about myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed of my work or apologetic about my career choice. I finally understood that the invisible nature of my job didn't make it less important, it made it more crucial. The drive back to Colorado Springs the next morning felt different than any trip I'd made before. Instead of the usual knot in my stomach that came from family interactions, I felt lighter, almost euphoric. Trevor had insisted on walking me to my car, carrying my overnight bag, and apologizing again for what felt like the 100th time. "Madison, I know I said this last night, but I need you to know how sorry I am," he said as I unlocked my trunk. "Not just for what I said at the party, but for everything. All those years of making you feel small." "Trevor, we're good," I assured him, though part of me was still processing the whiplash of going from public humiliation to public vindication in the span of one evening. "No, we're not good yet," he said firmly, "but we will be. I want to make this right, and that's going to take more than just an apology." I was curious what he meant, but he just hugged me tightly and promised to call soon. The real surprise came when I got back to my apartment and found my phone buzzing with notifications. Apparently, someone at the party had recorded Chief Rodriguez's speech and shared it in the family group chat. My phone was filled with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, congratulations, questions about my work, and expressions of pride that made my chest tight with emotion. But the most unexpected message came from my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. Someone had tagged her in a Facebook post about the party, and she'd written a long comment about how she'd always known I was destined for important work, even when I was a quiet teenager unsure about my future. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Trevor called me every few days, asking genuine questions about cybersecurity and sharing articles he'd found about cyber warfare. He'd done his own research and seemed genuinely fascinated by the field I'd chosen. "Did you know that the Pentagon considers cyber attacks an act of war equivalent to physical attacks?" he asked during one call. "I read this article about how a single successful attack on the power grid could kill more people than a terrorist bombing." It was surreal hearing my brother discuss my field with such enthusiasm and respect. For years, he'd dismissed it as computer stuff, and now he was sending me news articles about ransomware attacks and asking about my opinions on national cybersecurity policy. The transformation wasn't limited to Trevor. Mom started introducing her to her friends as my daughter, the cybersecurity expert who protects the military's computers. Dad began asking detailed questions about my work, and while I still couldn't share specifics, I could tell he was finally grasping the scope and importance of what I did. 3 weeks after the retirement party, I got the official call about the award ceremony. Colonel Hendricks personally invited my family to attend, explaining that the Department of Defense was making a significant effort to highlight the contributions of cybersecurity personnel. The American public needs to understand that modern warfare includes digital battlefields.
Your work represents the kind of invisible heroism that keeps our nation secure, and we want to recognize that publicly. The ceremony was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Peterson Air Force Base. My entire immediate family would attend, along with Chief Rodriguez, who had been specifically invited by the colonel for his role in advocating for my recognition. But perhaps the most meaningful development came 2 days before the ceremony. I was working late, analyzing suspicious network traffic patterns that had been flagged by our automated systems, when my supervisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, stopped by my workstation. "Madison, do you have a minute?" she asked, pulling up a chair beside me. Dr. Chen was a legend in the cybersecurity community, a former NSA analyst who had transitioned to military contracting and was widely respected for her expertise in advanced persistent threats. Having her attention was always significant.
I wanted to talk to you about your future here, she said without preamble. Your work over the past year has been exceptional, but more than that, you've demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking and strategic mindset that suggests you're ready for much greater responsibilities. My heart started racing. What kind of responsibilities? The Pentagon is launching a new initiative called the Digital Defense Task Force, she explained. It's a multi-agency team that will coordinate cyber defense across all branches of the military, plus cooperation with FBI, NSA, and Homeland Security. They're looking for analysts who can think beyond individual attacks and start identifying patterns that suggest larger strategic threats. She paused, studying my reaction. The selection process is extremely competitive, and it would require another level of security clearance, plus relocation to the DC area. But Colonel Hendricks specifically recommended you for consideration. I stared at her in shock. The colonel recommended me? She was very impressed with your analysis of the February attack. Apparently, your report identified connections to other attacks across multiple installations that no one else had noticed. That kind of pattern recognition is exactly what the task force needs. She paused, studying my reaction. The selection process is extremely competitive, and it would require another level of security clearance, plus relocation to the DC area. But Colonel Hendricks specifically recommended you for consideration. I stared at her in shock. The colonel recommended me? She was very impressed with your analysis of the February attack. Apparently, your report identified connections to other attacks across multiple installations that no one else had noticed. That kind of pattern recognition is exactly what the task force needs. The February attack? The one Chief Rodriguez had mentioned at the retirement party. I remembered spending countless hours tracing digital fingerprints across different networks, slowly building a picture of a coordinated campaign that seemed designed to probe weaknesses across multiple military installations simultaneously. Madison, I want you to understand what this opportunity represents, Dr. Chen continued. The Digital Defense Task Force isn't just another government job. It's the future of national security. The people selected for this program will be at the forefront of protecting America from the kinds of sophisticated attacks that could cripple our entire infrastructure. She handed me a thick folder. This is the application packet. It includes a detailed description of the program, the selection criteria, and the security clearance requirements. Take your time reviewing it, but know that applications are due within 2 weeks. After she left, I sat in my cubicle staring at the folder, trying to process what had just happened. 6 months ago, my own brother had publicly humiliated me for having a meaningless desk job. Now I was being recruited for what sounded like one of the most important cybersecurity positions in the federal government. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I called Trevor to tell him about the opportunity. His reaction surprised me even more than Dr. Chen's offer had. "Madison, that's incredible," he said, his excitement evident even over the phone. "I've been reading about these cyber warfare programs. Do you realize you'd be on the team protecting the entire country's digital infrastructure?" "I'm still processing it myself," I admitted. "A year ago, I was just hoping to prove myself as a junior analyst. Now they want me to help coordinate national cyber defense." "This calls for a celebration," Trevor said.
I'm driving up to Colorado Springs this weekend. We're going to have dinner somewhere nice, and you're going to tell me everything you can about this new position." The enthusiasm in his voice made me smile. "Trevor, you don't need to drive 4 hours just to take me to dinner." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "Madison, I spent years making you feel bad about your career choices. The least I can do is celebrate your successes. Besides, I want to understand what my sister does so I can brag about her properly." Friday afternoon arrived faster than I expected. My family had driven up from Pueblo the night before, staying at a hotel near the base. As we went through security and were escorted to the ceremony location, I could see them taking everything in with wide eyes. The ceremony was held in a conference room that had been set up with military precision. About 30 people were present, other award recipients, military officials, and family members. Colonel Hendricks was even more impressive in person than she had been on the phone, tall, confident, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. When my name was called, I walked to the front of the room on unsteady legs. Colonel Hendricks shook my hand firmly and began reading from a prepared statement. "Senior analyst Madison Clark is being recognized today for exceptional service in the defense of critical military cybersecurity infrastructure. Over the past 18 months, analyst Clark has demonstrated superior analytical capability in identifying, tracking, and neutralizing sophisticated cyber threats from foreign adversaries." She paused, looking directly at me. Analyst Clark's work has directly prevented multiple successful attacks on military communication systems, defense contractor databases, and logistical networks. Her analysis has contributed to the identification of foreign intelligence operations targeting American military personnel, and has resulted in the development of new defensive protocols now used across all branches of the armed services. The formal language felt strange applied to my daily work, but seeing the pride on my family's faces made it real in a way that no amount of personal satisfaction could have achieved. In recognition of her dedicated service and exceptional performance, analyst Madison Clark is hereby awarded the Department of Defense Civilian Service Medal and is promoted to the position of Senior Cybersecurity Analyst with Enhanced Security Clearance. As Colonel Hendricks pinned the medal to my jacket, I caught sight of Trevor in the audience. He was wiping tears from his eyes, looking at me with an expression of pure admiration that I'd never seen before. After the medal ceremony, Colonel Hendricks invited my family to join her for a private reception in her office. As we walked through the corridors of Peterson Air Force Base, I noticed how differently people looked at me now. Word had spread about the award, and several colleagues nodded respectfully as we passed. "Madison," Colonel Hendricks said as we settled into her office, "I wanted your family to understand exactly what your daughter's work means to our national security posture." She pulled out a tablet and showed us a map of the United States dotted with red markers. Each of these represents a cyber attack attempt on military or defense contractor systems in the past 6 months. Madison's team was involved in stopping 63 of these attacks. Dad leaned forward, studying the map. 63 in 6 months? "That's just the ones we can talk about," Colonel Hendricks replied. "The classified incidents number significantly higher. Madison, your analysis helped us understand that many of these seemingly random attacks were actually coordinated probes designed to identify vulnerabilities for a much larger assault."
She switched to another screen, showing a timeline with various colored lines intersecting. This is what we call the attack correlation matrix that Madison developed. She was the first analyst to recognize that attacks happening weeks apart on different systems were actually connected pieces of a single intelligence-gathering operation. Trevor was staring at the screen in fascination. "Colonel, what would have happened if Madison hadn't identified these patterns?" "Honestly, we could have been looking at a digital Pearl Harbor," she said without hesitation. The Foreign Intelligence Service behind these attacks was systematically mapping our defensive capabilities, looking for the exact vulnerabilities they would need to shut down our communication systems during a crisis. The weight of her words settled over the room. My younger sister Emma, who had been quiet throughout the ceremony, finally spoke up. "So Madison literally prevented a potential attack on the entire military?" "Madison and her team, yes," Colonel Hendricks confirmed. But Madison's pattern recognition was the key breakthrough. Without her analysis, we would have continued treating these as isolated incidents instead of recognizing them as preparation for something much bigger. She turned to address my parents directly. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, I want you to understand that your daughter's work operates at the highest levels of national security. The briefings she prepares are read by generals, intelligence directors, and policymakers who rely on her analysis to make decisions that affect millions of Americans. Mom was crying softly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning about her daughter's career. "We had no idea," she whispered. "All these years, we thought—" "You thought she was just working a regular office job," Colonel Hendricks finished gently. "That's understandable, and it's actually by design. The most effective cybersecurity operations are the ones nobody talks about, because talking about them gives our enemies information they can use against us." She pulled up one more screen, this one showing a photograph of what looked like a control room filled with monitors and workstations. "This is the Cyber Operations Center where Madison works. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, monitoring threats to every military installation in North America. The analysts who work here are literally standing guard over our digital borders." Chief Rodriguez, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "Colonel, this helps me understand something I've been thinking about since our conversation a few weeks ago. In the fire service, we talk about prevention being better than response. It sounds like Madison's work is the ultimate prevention." "Exactly," Colonel Hendricks agreed. "When Madison stops a cyber attack, she's preventing potential catastrophes that could affect millions of people. Power grid failures, communication blackouts, transportation system disruptions, all of these could result from successful cyber attacks on military systems that control civilian infrastructure." She stood up and walked to a wall covered with commendations and photographs. "Madison, I want to show your family something else." She pointed to a framed photograph showing a group of military and civilian analysts standing in front of a large American flag. This photo was taken after we successfully defended against what we now call the Christmas campaign, a coordinated series of attacks that targeted multiple military installations during the holiday period when staffing was reduced. I recognized the photo immediately. It had been taken after the 36-hour marathon session I'd mentioned to my family, when our entire team had worked around the clock to counter a sophisticated attack that had targeted 17 different installations simultaneously. "Madison was the lead analyst on that operation," Colonel Hendricks continued. "Her coordination of defensive measures across multiple installations prevented what intelligence services later determined could have been the most successful foreign cyber operation against U.S. military systems in history." Trevor was shaking his head in amazement. "Madison, why didn't you ever tell us about stuff like this?" "Because I couldn't," I said simply. "Everything Colonel Hendricks is sharing with you today required special clearance. Most of what I do, I still can't talk about." Colonel Hendricks nodded. "The security classification exists for good reason. Our enemies are constantly trying to understand our defensive capabilities. The less they know about how we identify and counter their attacks, the more effective our defenses remain." She returned to her desk and picked up an official-looking document. "Which brings me to the next matter. Madison, I've received final approval for your transfer to the Digital Defense Task Force. If you choose to accept, you'll be reporting to the Pentagon in 8 weeks to begin orientation for what will essentially be a leadership role in coordinating cyber defense across all branches of government." The room fell silent as everyone processed what she'd just said. The Pentagon, a leadership role. After years of feeling like my work was invisible and unimportant, I was being offered a position at the very center of national cybersecurity operations. "The position comes with a significant increase in responsibility and compensation," Colonel Hendricks continued. "You'll be briefing senior military leadership, coordinating with intelligence agencies, and helping to develop the strategic policies that will guide America's cyber defense for the next decade." Dad cleared his throat. "Colonel, can you help us understand what this means for Madison's career? Where does this lead?" "Mr. Clark, I can tell you that the people selected for the Digital Defense Task Force are being groomed for the highest levels of cybersecurity leadership in the federal government. Madison could end up directing cyber defense operations for the entire Department of Defense or leading cybersecurity policy development at the national level." She paused, looking directly at me.
Madison, I want you to understand that this opportunity exists because of the exceptional work you've already done. You've proven that you can think strategically, work under pressure, and coordinate complex operations across multiple organizations. Those are exactly the skills we need at the policy level. As we prepared to leave, Colonel Hendricks pulled me aside for a private conversation. Madison, I know this is a lot to process, but I want you to consider something else. Your story, going from a misunderstood junior analyst to a nationally recognized cybersecurity expert, is exactly the kind of inspiration other young people need to hear. She handed me another business card. I'd like you to consider participating in a recruitment program where you'd speak at universities and technical colleges about cybersecurity careers. Too many talented people avoid this field because they don't understand its importance or think it's just computer work.
You mean public speaking? I asked, feeling a familiar flutter of anxiety. I mean helping other young people understand that cybersecurity is one of the most critical career paths they could choose for serving their country, she clarified. Your family's reaction tonight proves how much education we need to do about the importance of this work. On the drive back to Pueblo, my family was unusually quiet, processing everything they'd learned. Finally, Trevor broke the silence. Madison, I owe you more than just an apology, he said from the passenger seat, where he'd insisted on sitting so he could turn around to face me while we talked. I need to make amends for years of making you feel ashamed of work that's apparently more important than anything I've ever done. Trevor, your work is important too, I said quickly. Firefighting saves lives every day. But Madison, Emma interjected from beside me, what you do prevents the emergencies that would require hundreds of firefighters to respond to. Like Colonel Hendricks said, you're preventing digital disasters that could affect millions of people. Dad adjusted the rearview mirror so he could see me better. Honey, I want you to know that your mother and I are incredibly proud of you, not just for the award or the promotion, but for the service you've been providing all along. We're sorry it took us so long to understand. We raised you to serve others, Mom added softly, and you've been doing exactly that in ways we never imagined possible. As we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I realized that everything had changed. Not just my family's understanding of my work, but my own understanding of my place in the world. For the first time in my career, I felt truly proud of what I did for a living. 3 months later, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room presenting my analysis of emerging cyber threats to a room full of generals, intelligence directors, and policymakers. As I explained the patterns my team had identified and our recommendations for defensive improvements, I thought about Trevor, who now introduced me to everyone as my sister, the cybersecurity expert who protects America's digital infrastructure. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees, fought by people whose names will never make the headlines. But that doesn't make them any less heroic. And thanks to one fire chief who understood the true value of my work, my family finally understood that too. 6 months after accepting the Pentagon position, I found myself sitting in a secure conference room on the 4th floor of the building, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in American national security. Admiral Rebecca Torres, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, was reviewing my latest threat assessment report, while the FBI's Cyber Division Director and the NSA's Deputy Director for Operations took notes. Madison, your analysis of the infrastructure targeting patterns is particularly concerning, Admiral Torres said, looking up from the classified document. Walk us through your conclusions about the timeline. I stood and activated the secure presentation system, displaying a complex network diagram that had taken my team 3 weeks to compile. Based on our analysis of attack vectors over the past 8 months, we believe foreign adversaries are systematically mapping our critical infrastructure vulnerabilities in preparation for a coordinated strike during a potential conflict scenario. The room was silent as I explained how seemingly unrelated probes of power grids, water treatment facilities, and communication networks formed a coherent intelligence-gathering operation. This was the kind of strategic analysis I'd never imagined myself capable of when I was just Madison Clark, the junior analyst whose brother thought she played computer games for a living. The sophistication level suggests state-sponsored operations with significant resources, I continued.
We're not dealing with random hackers anymore. This is advanced, persistent reconnaissance designed to create maximum disruption during a crisis. After the briefing, Admiral Torres asked me to stay behind. Madison, I've been reviewing your performance since joining the task force. Your analytical capabilities are exceptional. But more importantly, you've demonstrated leadership qualities that suggest you're ready for greater responsibility. She handed me a folder marked with the highest security classification I'd ever seen. The president has authorized the creation of a new position, Director of National Cybersecurity Coordination. It would involve overseeing cyber defense across all government agencies, military branches, and coordination with private sector critical infrastructure. My hands trembled slightly as I held the folder. Admiral, I'm honored, but I'm only 28 years old. Shouldn't this position go to someone with decades more experience? Madison, experience is valuable, but vision and analytical thinking are irreplaceable, she replied. You've consistently identified threats that more experienced analysts missed. Age doesn't determine effectiveness in cybersecurity. Understanding the evolving landscape does. The position would require Senate confirmation, extensive background investigation, and would make me one of the youngest senior officials in the federal government. It would also mean that Trevor's desk jockey sister would be responsible for protecting the digital infrastructure of the entire United States. That evening, I called home to share the news. The reaction was everything I could have hoped for and more. Madison, this is incredible! Trevor's voice practically exploded through the phone. Do you realize what this means? You're going to be in charge of protecting the whole country's computer systems? His enthusiasm was infectious, but what struck me most was how naturally he talked about my work now. Gone were the dismissive comments and condescending questions. Trevor had become one of my biggest advocates, regularly sharing news articles about cybersecurity with his firefighter colleagues and explaining why digital infrastructure protection was crucial for emergency responders. Trevor, I haven't accepted yet, I said. It's a massive responsibility. I'd be overseeing thousands of cybersecurity professionals across dozens of agencies. Madison, remember what Chief Rodriguez said at Dad's retirement party? Trevor replied. You come from a family of first responders. This is just a different kind of emergency response, preventing disasters before they happen on a national scale. Dad got on the phone next, his voice thick with emotion. Honey, when I started as a firefighter 35 years ago, the biggest emergency we prepared for was a multi-alarm fire or maybe a chemical spill. You're talking about preventing emergencies that could affect the entire country.
Your father's right, Mom added, having picked up the extension. We always taught you kids that with great ability comes great responsibility. This sounds like exactly the kind of responsibility you were meant to handle. The background investigation for the new position was more thorough than anything I'd experienced before. Federal agents interviewed everyone from my high school teachers to my college roommates. They spoke with neighbors, former colleagues, and distant relatives. The most meaningful interview, though, was with Chief Rodriguez. When the investigator asked about my character and integrity, he apparently spent an hour describing not just my professional capabilities, but the values I'd learned growing up in a family dedicated to public service. Madison Clark understands that real strength comes from protecting others, he told the investigator, according to the summary I was later shown. She's been doing that her entire career, just in ways most people don't see or understand. 3 weeks later, I received word that the investigation had been completed successfully. The formal nomination would be announced the following Monday, with Senate hearings scheduled for the month after. The announcement made national news. 28-year-old cybersecurity expert nominated for new national security role, read the headline in the Washington Post. The article described my background, my work at Peterson Air Force Base, and my role in preventing multiple cyber attacks on military infrastructure. But the coverage that meant the most to me appeared in the Pueblo Chieftain, our hometown newspaper. The headline read, "Local Fire Chief's Daughter Nominated for Top Cybersecurity Post." The article featured quotes from Chief Rodriguez, my parents, and even Trevor, who described me as a digital first responder protecting our entire nation. The Senate confirmation hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. My entire family made the trip to Washington, D.C., along with Chief Rodriguez and several colleagues from Peterson Air Force Base.
Sitting at the witness table facing the Senate Homeland Security Committee was surreal. 6 months earlier, I'd been worried about my brother's opinion of my career. Now I was being questioned by senators about my plans for protecting America's digital infrastructure. Miss Clark, Senator Patricia Williams from Colorado began, "You're remarkably young for such a significant position. What makes you believe you're qualified to oversee cybersecurity for the entire federal government?" I took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The years of invisible work, the family misunderstandings, the gradual recognition of my field's importance. "Senator Williams, cybersecurity isn't about age or traditional experience," I replied. "It's about understanding evolving threats and coordinating complex defensive operations across multiple organizations. Over the past 3 years, I've identified and helped prevent cyber attacks that could have compromised military communications, defense contractor databases, and critical infrastructure systems." I gestured toward the gallery where my family sat. I learned about public service from my father, who spent 30 years as a firefighter and fire chief. He taught me that protecting others sometimes means doing difficult, dangerous work that people don't always understand or appreciate. Cybersecurity is exactly that kind of work. Senator David Chen from California leaned forward. "Miss Clark, can you give us an example of a specific threat you've identified and how you addressed it?" I outlined the coordinated attack campaign I'd analyzed, explaining how pattern recognition had revealed what appeared to be random incidents were actually systematic intelligence gathering by foreign adversaries. The key insight was recognizing that attacks separated by weeks and targeting different systems were actually connected pieces of a larger operation, I explained. By understanding the bigger picture, we were able to develop defensive measures that protected not just individual systems, but the entire network they were trying to map. Senator Williams nodded approvingly. "Ms. Clark, if confirmed, what would be your top priorities as Director of National Cybersecurity Coordination?" "First, improving information sharing between government agencies and private sector partners," I replied immediately. "Cyber attacks don't respect organizational boundaries, so our defenses can't either. Second, developing rapid response capabilities for when attacks do succeed. And third, building the next generation of cybersecurity professionals through education and recruitment programs." After 2 hours of questioning, the committee voted unanimously to recommend my confirmation. The full Senate vote was scheduled for the following week. On the day of the Senate vote, I sat in the gallery with my family, watching as senators cast their votes electronically. When the final tally appeared, 94 votes in favor, 6 abstentions, I felt a mix of pride, terror, and determination. Admiral Torres, who had attended the vote, shook my hand afterward. "Congratulations, Director Clark. The country is lucky to have you." Director Clark. The title still felt surreal. The swearing-in ceremony was held the following Friday in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. As I raised my right hand and repeated the oath of office, I caught sight of Trevor in the audience. He was crying openly, no longer embarrassed about showing emotion for his sister's achievements. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photos and congratulations, Trevor pulled me aside. "Madison, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "Remember that night at Dad's retirement party when I said those horrible things about your work?" I nodded, though it felt like a lifetime ago. "I've been thinking about that night every day since then," he continued. "Not just because I was wrong about your job, but because of what it taught me about making assumptions. I've started asking more questions at work, trying to understand what people do before I judge whether it's important." He paused, wiping his eyes. "You didn't just change how our family sees your work, Madison. You changed how I see everything. You taught me that the most important work is often the work nobody sees." As the reception continued around us, with senators, military officials, and cybersecurity experts congratulating me on my new role, I realized that the real victory wasn't the promotion or the recognition. It was the understanding, my family's understanding of my work, and my own understanding of its importance.
6 years ago, I'd been a college student, unsure about my future, choosing cybersecurity because it seemed interesting and stable. 3 years ago, I'd been a junior analyst whose own brother mocked her career choice. Today, I was the Director of National Cybersecurity Coordination, responsible for protecting the digital infrastructure that modern America depends on. But the journey from mockery to recognition had taught me something more valuable than professional success. It has taught me that meaningful work doesn't always look meaningful from the outside, that service takes many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names never make the headlines. As I looked out at my family, Dad beaming with pride, Mom crying happy tears, Emma asking detailed questions about my new responsibilities, and Trevor enthusiastically explaining cybersecurity to anyone who would listen, I realized that this was what victory really looked like. Not just professional recognition or career advancement, but the understanding that comes when people finally see the value in work they'd previously dismissed. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to explain why that work matters. In my case, that person was a fire chief who understood that different kinds of emergencies required different kinds of first responders. Thanks to Chief Rodriguez, my family finally understood that I'd been a first responder all along. I just happened to fight fires that most people never see. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.